So.
It says right here. Yeah. Because she doesn't say, it doesn't say where that is, where that is.
I turned it off. Welcome back, everybody. It is October 16, 2023. Again, my apologies for starting this meeting a little bit late. We were in executive session, and that delayed us just a little bit. So thank you for your patience. This is a work session, so for anybody who's not familiar with the process, our procedure is a little more informal than at a regular business meeting. We don't make binding decisions, except for perhaps to give direction to staff at a work session. It's mostly an opportunity just to have a conversation and discussion. And council, oftentimes we try to direct our comments to me so as to not have kind of direct conversations between council members that can get heated. That's often a good process, but because our process is a little more informal here, I don't want to stop you from actually engaging your fellow council person either. So please feel free to be more informal in our conversation here this evening. So we will start off with public comment on any item that's on our agenda tonight. There's a agenda on the back. We've got two primary items on our agenda. First, our Tourism Business Improvement District, MOU, about the proposed recreation center, and then second, our council subcommittee structure. So there'll be an opportunity for public comment on each of those items when we get to those items. But if you would like to comment either on those items now because you've got to go, or you've got something that's not even on our agenda, this is a perfectly fine opportunity to make those comments. So I know we've got a couple special presentations, but please come to the podium if you would like to be heard at this time. Do we have any public comment on any item on our agenda? Go ahead.
Good evening.
Thank you, John.
I'm Judy Adams. I live at thank you so much, Chris. Oh, my. I live at 5520 Morningstar Lane, Billings, Montana, 59106. Tonight I want to address you on the upcoming ballot issue on November 7th. And Mayor and council members, at the first of the year, I came and spoke to you. I was very excited about the possibility of a voter ballot issue that had to do with parks, recreation, trails improvements, and the new recreation center. Much has happened since then, and we all know that. I attended the North Park Community Center informational session on October 4th for the general public to ask questions in an effort to learn more detailed information about November 7th ballot issue. After hearing so many conflicting versions of how much it is going to operate and maintain this new recreation center, I decided to personally ask some questions of the city staff, who was mostly park staff, who were in attendance, to ask and answer these questions. It was very disappointing to me and other staff that were there that they did not know any cost of what the memberships were going to be at the brand new recreation center. Our citizens and myself, many of us have understood that the study by the consulting firm of Ballard King had projected a budget for the center operational costs, including fees and charges. And they had projected a cost recovery of the range 78 to 90%. We all know that. That's what they have said that will be revenues versus expenditures in the recovery or new center. Worst case scenario, we would have a subsidy of $765,646 a year. And the budget shortfall would be covered in that amount through the Billings Chamber of Commerce of $800,000 a cap for over the next 10 years. Personally, this is hard for me to make this comment, but I personally disagree. And I personally disagree with these recovery projections. Why? There is a shortage of full-time supervisory and maintenance staff that has been projected for this type of facilities involving 50-meter aquatic center and the ice facility with 2 sheets of ice to maintain and manage these, especially these 2 facilities. I am a park practitioner that has worked in this field for 40 years. I have managed over 100, not only designed, built, and managed these type of facilities. And if you don't take this seriously, how much this is going to hurt this community, you have no idea where it will hurt us in the general fund, and if not, it will be a strain on the park fund. And also park personnel, I've seen this happen where they'll start pulling park personnel to subsidize this type of center, to take care of some of those costs. And that's very devastating to a department, especially when you've been in an agency 32 years like I have. My concern is truly a valid budget. If you're going to project this type of budget, you should know your fees and charges when you go into the vote like this, at least a range. Right now, from what the answers have been, instead of answering what the fees and charges would be for a family and individual, the answer was, we have no idea what the membership costs will be for the new center. The Ballard King report is the firm's own projections and not ours. To me and others, this was absolutely unacceptable and a conflict of what the city is using, which is the Ballard King report. And that was hard to take, that we're going forward with something that one hand says one thing, the other says another. The Ballard King does not address non-resident fee options in the overall equation involving revenue portion of the facility's projected budget. The bottom line is city administration has not set forth a detailed plan, including a programming plan in detail, which is done by staff from the consultant reports before you go forward, of the fees and charges that will be charged for our families and our children to use this center. Again, it's unacceptable, especially when adding and asking for public dollars to support something of this magnitude. In addition, it is now known.
Jody, I'm just going to ask you to wrap up because the 3 minutes was up a while ago. So.
Okay. It is now known that there has not been also projected funding and maintenance for the other park projects that are proposed, which will be possibly another vote coming forward. Personally, I'm 100% behind building and supporting these type of facilities as long as they are soundly planned out. I'll be happy and I'll wrap up and I'll just give my written comments to the city manager.
Good. Thank you, Jody, and Chris. Thank you. I'm sure there were some important points there. We probably want staff to follow up with, see whether there's some miscommunication or on those issues. Maybe at a future meeting we could get them to address that, unless you're prepared to. So, okay, very good. Other public comment?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Melanie Schwartz, 3630 Hayden Drive. I am the person that has had the pleasure over the past 3 months of raising the private funds for the park bond. I was hired by the chamber to accomplish that and raise the $6 million that you had requested, and then another $6 million in grants and foundations as if the bond passes. So I just want to take a quick minute and share a few experiences with you that I've had, and also I do have an announcement at the end. We'll do a drum roll at the end. How about that? Yeah. Okay. Anytime I take on a project, the first question I always ask is why? Why are we doing this? And I was here the night that Kim Jacobs sat and said, we're doing this because it's a once in a generation opportunity for our community. And so I heard her and I thought, you know what, if that's how Par Montana feels, then you've got a really, really good chance of raising this money, and I'm gonna go ahead and jump in on that. The bond resonates differently with each donor. And the obvious is adding parks and trails in a multi-generational recreation center, but our conversation always turns to youth, those that are underserved, public safety, and the needs of their businesses around workforce. Workforce has come up in almost every single conversation I've been at. And the other question is, or the other comment that I always get, and this was the most powerful for me, is it's our turn. And I'm like, what do you mean it's our turn? And many people are giving from the perspective of their legacy donors or philanthropists in our town. And over the last 30 or 40 years, maybe their parents gave or somebody gave before them. And now they view it as our turn to do that. And so the investments that were made by their parents, they're now thinking, hey, we've got the funds, we should continue to give, and they've chosen this project to do so. The other thing is that it will be a legacy. $173 million in projects, 16 projects throughout the entire community actually leaves quite a legacy for anybody that participates in this, anybody that votes for it and anybody that gives money to it. And we really think that I thought that was an interesting language for people to use, the word legacy. And although it's a large lift, it's also a brave and visionary package that many spent years to build and to present to our voters. And I think it's had a lot of credibility during my conversations because of how much time was spent to get to this point. Now, we can debate whether it should all be there or not, but the truth of it is the donors are really excited that it's this large, which is generating larger donations, which is actually working in your favor. Our community
And Melanie, the buzzer's going to go off in just a second,
gosh,
but don't worry about that. You and I talked a little bit, and we understand.
I said I did it in 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's
So,
fine. I just didn't want you to
promise
be
it's not
shaken
much
when that goes buzz.
Our community has stepped up as I knew that they would. And thanks to our first donors boldly approaching their colleagues and saying, yes, we need this, we are now here with a special announcement. Before the drum roll, Mayor Cole, I want to share with you some things about our businesses and philanthropic community. First, we are so fortunate to have the business leaders and legacy donors we have in our city. And without exception, each and every one has met with me, and even if they can't or don't want to participate, they have been exceptionally professional, and we have had meaningful conversations about the future of our community and the need for amenities available to all citizens. The conversation also always leads to the workforce crisis many are experiencing and the absolute link between talent attraction, public safety, community amenities as the three-legged stool we must manage and work together for solutions. They are appreciative the council voted to put this on the ballot and are equally as grateful for a council resolution to provide parameters around this significant bond. I love letting people know that the money raised from the private sector will go straight to reducing the full bond amount. That is important because we do hear that many of our fellow citizens are experiencing financial constraints. With the success of this campaign, we will, on day one, be able to reduce the amount needed from each property owner. What an amazing gift to come from our donor community, and what a message that these donors have spoken and said, we love our community and we will do whatever we can with our resources to make that happen. Thank you for indulging me with that. I just wanted to share with you the enthusiasm from the business community. And now I'd like to read, I would like to make the announcement. Now's the drum roll, Mayor Cole. As of today, we are at 4.1 million of the 6 million.
Say that again? I was rolling my drum.
You missed it. 4.1 million of the 6 million has been pledged as of tonight. And I'm going to read the donors that have stepped forward, kind of our early adopters, just so they get a little bit of extra attention for tonight so that you guys know who they are. Par Montana, Bill and Ann Cole, KOA Foundation, Big Sky Economic Development, Intermountain Healthcare St. Vincent, GEM Foundation, Greg and Eileen McDonald, Dave and Linda Ballard, Ballard Petroleum Holdings, Be Better World, William Henry, Best Western Clock Tower Inn, CHS Refinery, Phillips 66, Edwards Law Firm, Montana Allergy, Northern Hotel, Toby O'Rourke and DJ Clark, Sean and Julie Seedhouse, Sabanye Stillwater, Bill and Mary Underreiner, and Western Sky Strategies, Jess Peterson. So my last comment is, in addition to this list, which this will make you even more excited, there's a second list of people that I have commitments from. They're just not ready based on timing. And that list includes up to almost $3 million, 2.99 million is sitting on that list. So with those dollars, we would easily be over our 6 million in private donations. So that's amazing. So this is truly a public-private partnership, and I couldn't be more proud to live in a community that sees the value in this bond and is willing to support it at the ballot box and with their financial resources. Please thank them if you see them, and remind yourself the importance of this project to many of your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Melanie, just stay here. I just want to make absolutely clear understanding here that you have named commitments of $4.1 million toward the $6 million.
Correct.
and you have, we'll call them informal commitments, people who aren't willing to have their name out there at this time, for an additional in the neighborhood of $3 million. So you add those two together, and you're either confident or pretty confident that we will have in the neighborhood of $7 million private donations, every dollar of which will reduce what the taxpayer has to pay. And that's taken about 3 months, and you're not done.
That's
right?
correct. And I think the other thing that I just want to, be championing our community. I've raised money much of my career. I've never raised this much money this quickly. But that is all because you see people, Par Montana stepped up just right away, and people stepped forward early in this process, and it made it a lot easier. And so now they're kind of, seeing who else is participating and coming right along. So it's been a really enjoyable experience. I said I have the easiest job of anybody working on this bond right now, because all I do is go to lunch and ask for money.
Well, thank you, Melanie. Thank you for all of your efforts, and thank you to the donors who've made this possible.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you again. I allowed her to sit down. Maybe you guys had some questions, and she can come back. Are there any questions for Melanie? Melanie, to state the obvious, those dollars are contingent upon passage of the bond issue November 7th, correct? Yes, she says so. Okay, if nothing else for Melanie, we'll continue with our public comment. This is an opportunity for public comment on any item on our agenda or not. Is there other public comment? Any other public comment? Don't see any, so we will close that public comment period and move on with our regular agenda. And the first topic also involves the bond issue, and specifically the Billings Tourism Business Improvement District MOU with the city. Chris, Gina, who's going to start us off on a staff presentation here?
I'll very quickly hand it over to Gina here, who's got the technical side of this MOU. It comes out of the resolution that the council passed earlier this year that sought to define in writing and through agreement what the relationship will look like between the TBID, in loose terms, though not technical terms, bed tax, that commitment by the hoteliers to cover the operation loss on this facility up to $800,000 a year. So this is the MOU between that group requesting and making a request to you that you put this on the ballot of what their commitment looks like to help us cover the operations costs. So I'll turn it over to Gina. She can cover much better the technical side, and if we need to get back into any of these questions or things that came up earlier, this agreement, it ties into some of those. Thank you.
Gina.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I really don't have a presentation per se. I'm more here to answer any questions. The MOU that's been provided and attached to the packet is simply the MOU that memorializes and formalizes the commitment that the Tourism Business Improvement District has made to provide the funding. And in your resolution that council passed in August, providing guidelines for the bonded projects, that resolution included the requirement that the MOU be presented and signed. Actually, I think it required it to be signed before the election. So that's exactly what we're presenting to you today. The MOU does in fact memorialize and formalizes the commitment that they've made. Essentially, it says that the funding will begin after the completion of the construction, and that when the recreation center has actually begun operating, it provides that the district will renew the district for an additional 10-year period. It will seek to increase the assessment upon itself in order to satisfy the financial commitment, and that is essentially the commitment that you wanted memorialized in writing. And so if you have any more specific questions about anything in there, I'm happy to field those questions. There are some representatives here also from the district who may be able to assist with some questions that I might not be able to answer for you.
Okay, thank you, Gina. And as you say, I see we've got Alex Tyson, the Executive Director of Visit Billings, board members from the T-Bid with us. Well, I'll just ask them if they have any comments, and then I'll open it up to council for questions for Gina or for T-Bid representatives. Alex, Steve, George. Oh, okay. Okay, so you have no presentation, nothing. Okay, and we've all got the document. It's been in our packet. So we'll kick it back to council before we open for public comment on this item. Questions for Gina before I open up for public comment? Pam.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions. And these are the questions, Gina, that I had sent to you. And it was late in the afternoon, and I didn't expect you to be right on it because I know you're preparing for council also. I was given a heads up by one of our local government legislators who said that the T-bid was not to be used for operational costs unless they give an equal disbursement to other taxing entities. Now, I don't know what that means, and I couldn't find it. That was why I asked you that other question. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. I did visit this afternoon with a gentleman who was familiar with some of the T-bid operations, and I think it had to do with some of the sporting events in years past where you have agreements with different athletic associations, I suppose, high school sports or whatever, to pay. I guess you make an agreement. You don't pay equally, but you make some sort of agreement with those. So there was kind of a question that I had, and I wasn't able to follow up with this legislator. So that's one. The other one, when in the MOU on page 4, there's some of the conditions that the T-bid put forward. One of them is H primarily. And that's the one about it will be operated, the recreational center will be operated by a qualified, experienced, and proven facility manager or management group. It was my understanding that that has not yet been determined. That was part of our resolution, is that that was an option. So my concern is that is a condition from the T-bid board. So how does that condition follow what is in our resolution, which is a non-binding agreement, and we haven't decided what that's going to be?
Council Member Purington, to answer to address your first question about somebody providing you information that T-bid, cannot fund operations unless they provide equal disbursements to other taxing entities. I am not aware of any such statutory requirement. So I guess I would request some more specific information and authority that person is citing. There isn't any such requirement that I'm aware of. In my research of this and providing you the opinion that I provided in the staff memo. With regard to the issue of the condition that you cited, which I think you said was H on page 4. So if the resolution that council passed does require that a committee be appointed to study the optimal management structure to determine if it is going to be run by a manager or an outside group or some sort of authority or commission outside of the city, or if it's going to be run by city personnel. That's what that study is. And that point is actually made in the MOU as well. And that's in G, right above H. So the MOU does in fact state that this management structure will be studied to determine what the best management structure would be. And then H is simply more of a condition to clarify that the city will make the determination based on that study commission, that committee, but will hire, appoint, whatever is decided, that it's going to be somebody who has experience and who knows what they're doing, and basically that just reinforces what the committee is going to study. The committee is going to study it to determine what the best structure will be. This is not committing the city to one structure or another. It's just saying whoever is decided upon will be experienced, will be somebody who has some proven success or some proven experience in this type of managing this type of a facility.
And I agree with you what you just said, but it's a commitment that the T-bid is requiring. That's part of their commitment, or what they're requiring. Yeah, is expressly conditioned and contingent upon satisfaction of each of the following conditions. If that group decides, no, we don't want to hire outside management, then where's the T-bids?
Well, that's why the language says that the center will be operated by a facility manager or a management group. So it could be a manager within the city. I mean, it's not committing to an outside group. It's not committing to anything. It's just saying it.
We don't have anyone in the city of Billings that is qualified to do that.
And I'm not saying that is what's going to be decided. I'm just saying that this condition doesn't commit the city to hiring doesn't commit the city to one structure or another. It just says that it's going to be somebody, whoever the city decides that it's going to be, it needs to be somebody who's experienced and knows what they're doing and will maximize profitability, to minimize the operating shortfalls.
Mayor, could I just add brief? So in the first point, I think Gina did an excellent job in the cover memo, specifically quoting the statute. So that's not to say, as Gina said, if some legislator or somebody has something that's been missed, but the plain non-legal interpretation, and she highlighted it for you, specifically says powers of the board in administering districts, so that's 7-12-1131. Powers of the board, this being the Tourist Business Improvement District Board, the board in administering the district has all powers necessary to carry out the functions of the district contained in the ordinance creating it, including the power to, skipping down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, contract with a governing body to maintain streets, alleys, malls, bridges, ramps, tunnels, landscaping, and other public facilities as mutually agreed upon. And this request came to the city. You and I didn't say, TBID, you must do this. They approached us and said they would like to increase the TBID tax. Again, in loose terms, bed tax, there's a different definition for that statewide, but increase the tax on hotels to cover what the operating loss was estimated through the Ballard King study.
Okay, can I address the second question raised by Councilmember Purington, namely the city versus non-city management option? And this is a proposed agreement, and I think we want to make sure that we're in agreement about the meaning of it. So I'm going to pose a question for the TBID board members. They can decide who they want to respond to this. But as you just heard, Councilmember Purington on page raises the question that subsection H on page 4, about that language. And that language reads as follows. I'll just read it. The MGRC, so that's the Multi-Generational Recreation Center, will be operated by a qualified, experienced, and proven facility manager or management group with a proven resume of success in managing all facets of the activities and facilities of the MGRC to maximize profitability, revenues, to minimize operating shortfalls. And in our resolution from August 28th, we established in section 4 a process for determining that management. But in that resolution, specifically section, or on top of page 8, it'd be in that section 4C, it contemplates both a city entity or city employees and also a non-city employees as options. Councilmember Purington, as I understand it, I want to make sure that we're not saying that by signing off on the MOU, we are only committing ourselves to the non-city management option, which would be inconsistent with section 4 of our resolution. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. And Gina specifically says that when subsection H on page 4 talks about a management group, that management group could be somebody made up of city employees, but the agreement would still require that they have that experience. We don't want people whose Chris's, you fill in the blank, who doesn't know a basketball from a volleyball, being in charge of this. That's very understandable. But are we in agreement that management group in paragraph H on page 4 of the proposed MOU in the conditions could potentially mean a city management group as long as they had this experience, and we're not only committing to a non-city entity? Question clear?
Where did you get your law degree?
That's actually why we wrote it the way we wrote it.
I'm obviously trying to pin you down here, Steve.
No, and I appreciate that. So Steve Warlick, 2511 First Avenue North, Billings. So you're absolutely right. So this is, you have to look at them in G is basically saying that, first of all, there has to be a group of people, as it does in the resolution, to determine what is the best entity to manage this thing. And then H is really stating is, hey, what we want to make sure is that whoever manages it, whether or not it's Steve Warlick, Bill Cole, or whoever, is proven experience in all facets of it. There are a lot of people that have capabilities in one facility or one portion of it, but the entire facility. So it's not meant to say it's a management group, and it's not meant to say it's an individual. It's sit there to say it's a management group or manager. That could be, if it's determined to be the city, it's the city. If it's determined to be XYZ, it's XYZ. And that's why it was written that way. So it covers both bases from the community's perspective. And I just want to, and this goes to you, Chris. So the T-bid is not, and I just want to let you, and you said it briefly, this is not a tax, it's an assessment, okay? There's a state lodging facility tax, that's 8%. This is an assessment that the local hoteliers place on themselves to collect from overnight stays. So it's an assessment, it's not a tax, and I just want to make sure that we're intimately aware of that, okay? So assessment is the word that you'll be using from now on.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that clarification, Steve. Tom, did you want to keep Steve up here, or?
I did, actually,
Okay.
and it's somewhat related. The one thing I wanted to make sure, that section H ends with maximize profitability, revenues, and minimize operating shortfalls, which I think is a good goal. The stated goal, though, and you see this in L, is to be consistently operated and managed to promote its primary mission to serve the diverse recreational needs of the residents of Billings. In the secondary mission to support economic activity through sports, tourism, and related events. I just want to make sure that it might be possible to maximize profitability in such a way that prices our residents out of the facility. Right, and so that will always be a trade-off between maximizing profitability and serving the needs, the recreational needs of the community. How are we going to do that balance? Do you see that as a conflict at all?
First of all, I don't see, and Councilmember, I don't find it as a conflict. I think this is a business, okay? Regardless, it's a business, and it has to be looked at both from its primary function, which is that of the residential, and that of the secondary, which is the sports tourism. So it's a business. And if you look at, item J in the MOU, it talks to about having an authority or a commission to sit there and help oversee that. Because what you don't want to do, quite honestly, if we're arguing it from the T-bids perspective, it's, okay, let's have the monthly fees. And I'll just make up a number because I don't have the Ballard King study in front of me. Let's say we'll make it $5. So we go in the hole $1 million or $900,000 and we're covering $800,000. Now it's not maximizing the business. Conversely, let's say we all of a sudden want to go through and say, well, let's have it all purely sports. Let's have it from out of town. Let's have ice hockey tournaments and volleyball tournaments and so on and so forth. That's not doing the local community what it was intended to do. So this is a business. It's authority that has to be responsible to both sides of the spectrum. The residents who have put up the funds and are putting up the funds, and the sports tourism, which can enhance the visitor experience. And here in the city of Billings, that's really what you're looking for.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Steve. Other questions for Gina or Steve? I'll open it for public comment and come back to the council for further discussion. But let's do that. Is there any public comment specifically on this item, the proposed MOU with the Tourism Business Improvement District and their 50 or so hoteliers? Nobody's online, nobody's coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period. Please extend our thank you to the hoteliers for their doing this. It's $800,000 times 10 years. That's $8 million. We recognize the significance of this. Council, there's no vote. This will be coming back to us. Chris, clarify, I guess my assumption is if we had some changes, you would incorporate them. It'd probably come back on a consent agenda at a future meeting, right? Can you clarify a little bit where we're at procedurally?
So trying to learn from some of our conversations in the past. So the memo in the packet is ready to add this to Monday's agenda. It was not added to Monday's agenda, though, until after we had this conversation. So if you have changes and things you want different, and those things take some weeks for us to resolve, then I would not bring it back in 7 days, and make it for a November meeting. However, if your direction tonight is this MOU it is consistent with our resolution. We don't have any substantive changes to it. With your direction, I would add it to the agenda tomorrow so that your consent agenda 7 days from now would adopt or approve the MOU. So basically, there is a timing question. So to be clear, it is currently not on next Monday's action agenda because we wanted to see what feedback we got this evening with the intent then of putting it on the nearest agenda that makes sense. So with your direction, it can either be added for 7 days from tonight, or do you have other things you want us adjusting, therefore we need to come back to you in November?
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Maybe this would be helpful if we just take an informal poll. I think this looks good. It's in line with our resolution. I don't have any changes. Who else is there?
I'm seeing a majority.
Okay.
Do you need anything further, or do other council members want to argue against that and convince us otherwise? Or in favor? Councilmember Ripsis.
Mayor, I would just request if anybody actually has any changes they'd like to suggest, do them now instead of after we pass the MOU.
That would be important. Do any council members have changes? Councilmember Purington?
Gina, I would like to look that up to verify what was said about operational expenses And at one point, and I don't know if the board can even verify this, it was my understanding that it would be operational for just certain events. It's not on a day-to-day operation. So that's another thing that I am trying to
So,
hash out.
Councilmember Parrington, Mayor and Council, I'm not aware of any restriction in this MOU that gets into how or specifically types of events. It is a not to exceed $800,000 for the operational expenses. So I'm not aware of any, we've had no conversations between the TBID and the city relative to carving out uses of the facility.
And
Steve, you want to comment on that?
council, oh, sorry.
Or, I'm sorry, I'm going to let Gina comment and then
Yeah,
we'll come back, Steve.
I just wanted to also reiterate something I said earlier. Councilmember Purington asked that it be looked up regarding the restriction for operating expenses, and I did that research already, and there is no requirement that exists that restricts the funds being used for that purpose. So that's why I said I would need whoever provided you that information to provide a source of that.
Thank you.
Okay, so that ball is in Councilmember Purington's court to follow up on. Steve, did you want to comment?
Just briefly. So I think you have to look at the MOU as a separate entity. There are sporting events, there are events in this city that we do enhance or that we do apply funds for operations, for rental factors, or for that. High school wrestling tournament, it's a prime example that we do. Billings would not have a wrestling tournament unless we funded a portion of that to Metro Park. And so those are separate and distinct. Each one is separate and distinct, and we look at it totally from a value standpoint from the citizens or from the hoteliers. When you look at the MOU and what we're looking at, we're making that as one entity, not just equal. It doesn't have to be equal. There, in the statute, I will tell you, and there are 22 T-bids in the state, and I've been involved in probably 13 or 14 of putting them together, and there is nowhere near, and the government official that said that, or the legislator that said that, is totally incorrect.
So, just a question.
Sure.
So, and it brought to mind another question that I have, and it hasn't really come up. So if you're saying, I think it was 2025, that you're saying that this amount of money would be available to use if the rec center is open and operational. So just in your budget, because you do host, a lot of other events, what is this going to do to the rest of your budget for, say, the year? 800,000 goes to the rec center. Then what's the rest of it?
And Councilman Purington, based on what we've provided in the MOU, what we've agreed as a board is that we would increase our assessment to $2. $1 of that basically covers the $800,000. The other dollar that we're looking to increase is to enhance our sports and marketing and tourism program that we currently have shifted to. So to answer your question, there's no impact on the existing programs that we do. It only furthers. In fact, it will do one other item. It'll allow us to enhance our sports marketing, but also take additional dollars and enhance our leisure marketing. And Billings used to be known as a convention town. 25% of our business in the hotels was generated from meetings and conferences, large meetings and conferences. That business has basically gone away. The DoubleTree and the Northern and a variety of the other hotels do well with their meetings, but we don't have very many citywide tournament or meetings anymore. It's a market that we see that we need to get back into post-COVID. The other market that we see that we have left alone for the time being has been in the international market. We see that starting to come back. And so we need, we're not going to cut anything. We're going to only enhance our programs. And that's why we're looking at the $4 or the $2 increase in the assessment.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Alice?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Alex Tyson. I'm the Executive Director of Visit Billings, 815 South 27th Street in Billings, Montana. I do want to just note that the TBID board, as the MOU reads currently, is approved by the TBID board. Should there be any additions and we want to still get this approved prior to the election, which is just a self-imposed deadline. There's nothing that says it has to be. It's just obviously the way that we wanted to do it chronologically and work with you for the voters. However, if there are adjustments, since we won't have a formal TBID board meeting until the second Thursday of November, we would need to call a special meeting. So we would just need 48 hours, making sure that anything that you redline, the TBID board approves, and that our attorneys can talk.
Alex, just to clarify, if we approve this at our next meeting in 7 days, that is still, your next meeting is still after the election?
That's correct. If you don't make any changes to it, the TBID board approves the MOU as it is right now. If you guys make any other red line adjustments that are major adjustments, we'll need to call a special meeting and have them.
But your board has the power to approve it before the election,
Absolutely.
as if it does not include major changes?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, Councilmember Owen?
Alex, while you're here, can I ask you something that Steve said sort of puzzled me a little, and maybe I misunderstood, so I just wanted to give you a chance to clarify. So the TBID budget right now, with the $2 assessment,
Yes.
is 1.8 million.
Thank you.
So, right?
1.725.
Okay, so about 900,000 per dollar.
About 800,000 per dollar.
Okay.
Yes.
So 800,000 goes to the annual support of this facility, of the new assessment, and then the other 800,000 goes to sports promotion?
No.
Okay, help me, I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood.
So to Steve's point, if you look at where we are right now, we're a capped organization. We're at 1.725, call it even really 1.7 million.
Because in 2024, your projected revenue was 1.8.
We had some carryover with that.
Got it, okay,
Correct.
go ahead, please
Okay.
continue.
So if you essentially say that as it stands right now with our average occupancy that that is kind of our annual average with 54 hotels, and I know that we have more hotels that are coming online, that increases inventory, increases our budget. But if you look at where we are right now at 1.7 and we increase 2, we're at closer to 4. If you take that 800,000 and that 800,000 goes to 10 years of this facility, the additional 800,000 will allow us to do what we're not able to do right now and grow what we are currently doing. Right now, we're having to rob Peter to pay Paul in order for us to open up more sports opportunities and continue to do what we're doing in sports, continue to do what we're doing in meetings and conventions, in domestic and international group tours, and the bread and butter in this community as far as leisure is concerned, we're having to take from markets. Budgets from each one of those markets. By increasing to $4, it allows us to not only accommodate this offering and commitment from the TBID to help with the deficit, it also allows us to increase everything that we're doing across the board, hire more staff, do more investments, be more strategic at what we're doing for the destination and for our stakeholders as a whole.
So you'll spread it across your budget, is that?
Across the budget.
Okay. And so then in the event that the bond fails this fall, do you still intend to do a $1 raise?
We intend to do $2.
No matter what?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything, council? I heard a nod of the head to putting this on the consent agenda. That's where I guess we'll proceed if there's nothing to the contrary. Anything else on this item before we move on to the second item on our agenda? Okay, nobody's raising their hand, so Chris, I think you've got your direction. Thank you, everybody. That concludes item number 1, and we'll move on then to item number 2, the council subcommittee structure. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Chris, if you can just kind of remind us why we're talking about it, and then Councilmember Shaw this afternoon did what I was hoping to do, which was give us a starting point of some of the issues for the subcommittees, and she sent around an email this afternoon, but was also nice enough to print a copy, which I think everybody had on their desk. So Chris, when you're done, I'll probably just turn it to Councilmember Shaw and ask her to kind of lead us through her suggestions. But Chris, I want to give you a chance
Yes.
in case you want to comment.
So, Mayor and
before we
Council,
do.
so twofold. So, yeah, this is here based on an initiative from one of you. I don't recall who, or the general direction was, let's come back and talk about the resolution that was created almost a year ago, kind of to the day. So, what we have and what I sent you over the weekend was the resolution in the packet from last year that established the 4 council standing committees. And it's just based simply on conversations that some of you have had with me, as well as I presume you've had with each other, of the desire to make some changes. I think the most forward way to do it is literally, you have a resolution, we have a resolution that was adopted. If there are any amendments to make to that resolution or changes, to build consensus around those, and then we will bring it back and put it on an agenda for you to adjust accordingly.
Okay, so the resolution wouldn't need to be tweaked if we wanted to make any changes. If there's no objection, I'm going to just ask Councilmember Shaw to kind of take us through her 5 points, or whatever combination of those you want to.
Thank you.
Councilmember Shaw?
Yep, I'll just try and give, I mean, you can read it, but just for the public as well, I'll give a little quick synopsis. So I had 5 things that I've been thinking about now since the legislative committee stopped meeting every week after we had our sprint through the session. What worked, what didn't work, how could this work better? The first one is local affairs with 2 people I think was kind of a bonkers idea that's not working well. I think we should dissolve that committee and fold them into budget and finance. Related to that, I think budget and finance has taken on a lot more responsibility for shaping financial policy than I necessarily envisioned. So I think we need 5 council members on it, in my opinion. Second one, Ed caught this, that this should say intergovernmental, not intra-governmental. I was writing this very quickly. But I think the legislative committee should be redefined to cover the scope of work that local affairs was also doing. So coordinating with SD2 and the county as appropriate. The third one is, I think we had this idea that we would switch it up every 2 years, and it turns out that means we just completely flip-flop the committees and lose all of our institutional knowledge that any of us had gained working on those. I didn't have a perfect structure for how to do this, but I think we need to come up with some sort of system for 2 or 3 council members rotating off every 2 years, so you're still keeping 2 or 3 people on that have gone through a legislative session or gone through several years of the budget, if that makes sense. Fourth one is, I'd like to put some language in here that the board chair should be rotated, limited to 2 years and rotated. And the fifth one is the operations committee. I think we either need to define its scope clearly as council operations, inter-council relationships, meeting efficiency, or we scrap that entirely and call it the policy committee, put 5 people on it, and they can deal with some of these larger policy issues that we kind of sometimes get into the weeds to. I think that should also have 5 members. I would say the mayor should be the chair. It should include the deputy mayor, the pro tem, and then 2 appointees that the mayor would make from council to kind of round that out. So these are the points that I was kicking around, and I just wanted to put them out for discussion, see if anybody had anything to add, but give us a starting point.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Shaw, for giving us a very good starting point and a lot to chew on. Council, I guess what I would suggest or ask you is, are you okay with just kind of going through these one by one? Some of them may kind of merge into another one, but that would be my suggestion procedurally. Okay, nobody's objecting to that. So the first item, I think, have broad agreement in the past that the local affairs group was just too small and similar in its mission of dealing with other governmental entities. And so Councilmember Shaw's proposal is to eliminate that and take those 2 members. And again, everybody's term here ends at the end of this year. And then we'll have new council members, of course, coming in, and then we'll have to reestablish these committees beginning at the beginning of the new year. But those 2 would shift over and and assigned to the Budget Committee, which would then bring that from, that's 3 now, right? 3 members, so we would have 2, call them primary committees of 5 each, which is an interesting number, given what we have for council members, so I think it would default to probably 1 from each ward. So that's the proposal. What do you think? Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Kulik?
I think it's helpful to remember a little history here, because I think this committee has struggled with mischaracterization. As I recall, and maybe I'm the only one who recalls it this way, there was a lack of enthusiasm for the committee concept from the city administrator, except for this committee, because there was a concern that we needed someone to more regularly interact with the county commission. And so when Kendra and I had talked about that felt weird and targeted, to just have a couple council members whose job it was to go figure out the commissioners. That didn't seem to make sense. And there also was, in at least my opinion, the quarterly meetings between the 3 governing entities don't work. There's too much to go through in an hour's lunch. And so there was a hope to create a joint entity that was meeting at least monthly among the 3 jurisdictions to coordinate, so that those quarterly meetings could be more effective. And I think, unfortunately, none of that happened. I think this committee didn't get enough support to invite the county or the school district to regularly engage, to get focused on what is shared between the 3 jurisdictions, what we can move forward. But this was really designed to improve cross-jurisdictional communication. And I just don't think it ever got the commitment broadly to make that happen. So I don't disagree that it's not effective now. But I think its original purpose is never got a chance to be tested, which I think is unfortunate. I think we should have tried harder. And I'm not sure that I'm willing to give up on the idea of having a group of people who, from all 3 jurisdictions, who meet more regularly, so that when we come together quarterly, we're more efficient and more effective, and that we're actually moving things forward and not just showing up to have lunch, report, and go off to our separate corners. So I have, I think, a different take on how I anticipated this committee going.
And Councilmember, just to clarify though, what you're talking about, being more active, more proactive, whatever you want to call it, would you agree could happen within the framework of this legislative, or whatever, no, whatever we call it, intergovernmental, whatever name?
Thank you for raising that, Mayor, because I would defer to those members. I mean, I wasn't on the committee, but it seemed like the legislative committee was incredibly busy. And it seems like during the off session, they would still be busy tracking interim committee and building legislation. I'm concerned it's too much for one jurisdiction, I guess, is for one committee to do state and county and school board. That just seems like a lot. So that would be my concern.
Especially during the session, or
especially during those 4 months, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Councilmember Gulick was next, and Councilmember Tricky. Councilmember Gulick?
I'll pass. I think I forgot my point.
Okay, Councilmember, you can come back, raise your hand. Councilmember Tricky?
When this ball of wax got started, it was because I was saying that we need to be paying attention to the relationships to other levels of government. I totally agree with Councilmember Owen that the county is definitely one of them, and we have to figure out a way to deal with that. The Budget and Finance Committee got added on in the process. I'll talk about that a little bit in another moment. I think structurally our biggest problem with these committees is that we're requiring everybody to be on one. We're setting it up and requiring everybody to be on one, whether or not they have the time or interest to be on one of these committees. And I think it makes a heck of a lot more sense to structure it so that people who, yes, I agree, fairness, amount of time, all that kind of stuff. But frankly, people just showing up to a meeting that they don't really want to be on or at doesn't bring any value to the table whatsoever. So the people who are showing up at these things need to be people who want to be there and have the ability to have some form of time and energy and impact on whatever the issue is. So I think that's the first thing we need to just get rid of, is that requirement that everybody be on a committee. Doing that, then we have to, figure out how to maximize, juggle the numbers and stuff like that. But juggling those numbers really depends much more on how many committees we have and how we want to structure those committees. The other comment that I want to make is I don't know from direct information, but I do know from personal experience that when you create an additional level of meetings, you create an additional amount of work for staff. And it would totally surprise me if staff was really happy right now at this point with having the budget committee in there without additional resources being allocated by council in order to take care of that work. So personally, I think we were doing okay without a budget and a policy committee. I do think if we have a budget committee, we have to have a policy committee. I'm not sure where operations fits into all of that. But yeah, if we're going to do budget, then we're going to have to do policy. And both of those, and we're going to have to be a lot more formal about the way things come up and whatnot. I think the way we've done it in the past has been okay. I do get that doing a deep dive into the budget speeds things up before it comes to the full council. But I also I'm not comfortable with a budget committee coming up with a whole new policy initiative without it being much more broader vetted by the wider council and the community as well. So that's why I feel like there needs to be a budget and a policy. Just to get back to this one, I don't think the local affairs board as it currently exists can work unless one of the people on that board was related to one of the county commissioners.
Related, okay. Okay, so number two goes with number one. They're kind of package deal, so I'm going to ask us to just, are we in agreement? But before we kind of jump to the chase, Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you. As a member of the Budget and Finance Committee, I think it's been really helpful for being able to, I guess one of our first tasks was we were over budget with the City Hall. What are we going to do? And staff was very helpful in coming up with suggestions, but we were very nimble in being able to get and have a very interactive dialogue that you just can't have. It's too unwieldy with 11 people in this setting. And I think it was very effective. I think it still could be effective with 5 folks. My thought is that the legislative committee, was great at it's a structured way of developing relationships with legislators, which I think is really important. I think, not having been on that, I can't speak to the off session. I mean, you have interim committees, and then you could structure ways of starting to develop relationships with legislators out of session now as well. But it does seem to me that there is. I'm certainly willing to try getting rid of local affairs and putting some of that task, developing those relationships with an agenda with the county commissioners as well. And I think SD2 is pretty small potatoes probably, but it could be bigger, but anyhow. So I guess I'm basically coming out and supporting what Councilmember Shaw has come up with.
Okay, so number one and number two, as a package, is there anybody who wants to, we got some concern about time, but we also don't have a great alternative to it. Before we just say yes to this, Councilmember Purinton and Councilmember Ripsis?
Well, having been on the legislative committee, and, and I appreciate that council has recognized the time frame that was in, and I think we're getting ready to gear up again to again talk with legislators now that there's going to be, new ones coming on board in another year. And I agree with Councilmember Owen that I'm not sure, I don't like the idea of a two-member board. I don't think that's what didn't work. And we have, council members that work during the day, and I realize that, and some are gone, some travel, so I understand that. So I think there has to be, I would like to see local affairs happen, because I think not only just the county and the school district, but, just look at the issues that the chamber brings up, or, now if this thing all comes around, you got the T-bid that you're dealing with. So you're dealing with other stakeholders within the community that aren't truly government official or government agencies. But it's good that we have some sort of understanding what they want, what we want, what the community needs. So, I would like to almost expand what that local affairs board would do. So I would not be interested in getting rid of it, but I think we need to figure out how to make it work. And I know there was one that, and I know this is off topic, that, to make that was it the budget or the policy one, Kendra, that you were saying make that, 5 members as well? Oh, both of them? So it is a struggle for council members to do this extra work. It truly is. But yet, I think if we're going to be part of the local community, then we need to be able to talk and visit. And if we look at a jail expansion, if we're looking at, our Jennifer's proposal to have some sort of municipal holding cells, we've got to talk to the other people. We do. And all you can do is just keep trying. I don't think you have to say one and done. You have to keep trying. And that's my opinion.
Okay, Councilmember Ripsis had his hand up first, and then Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I just real quick, I don't know that we haven't had an agenda for the last couple of months for the legislative committee. So yeah, there are interim committees, but I don't know that we're experiencing any kind of workload for that. So to me, it makes perfect sense to combine the local affairs and legislative committees and just have it be an intergovernmental committee, especially when you think of, during the legislature, the school district and the county are not going to be wanting to spend a lot of time with us. They've got their own concerns in front of the legislature. And if we've established those relationships over the interim, perhaps we can both be more effective working together. So I think it makes a nice, natural liaison there, and I would support combining the two of them. I don't think workload is going to be an issue.
Thank you, Councilor Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Sometimes I think that the local affairs was treated like a little redheaded stepchild. We just didn't give it the resources and enough people. So whether we keep it by itself or combine it, doesn't matter as long as there's enough people there that are interested and want to be on it. And we are local. This is our community. We should be aware of what's going around us. So either we keep it and add more people to it or merge it. I don't care as long as we give it more resources and what it's at. 2 people just isn't going to cut it.
Okay, so that's another option. We just expand its, people would have to be on more than one committee. Councilmember Shaw.
Part of the reason why I like combining them is we're going from 3 committees to 2, which I think is better for us and for staff. We're not asking them to devote as much time to an additional committee. So I would like to give this a try.
Just a question.
A question, sure.
Yeah, to Chris.
Chris?
Because we were very concerned about these subcommittees having an impact on staff. Have you heard any complaints, high fives, whatever from staff that, whatever their perception is of the subcommittees.
So in answering that question, the comment was already made by one of you that there was a lot of staff resistance to this, and most namely me. We specifically leaned in, myself and the staff. The determination was made to make the best of this and see how it would work. And I think that specific answer to your question is, I believe there has been improved outcomes, specifically from two of the committees. Yes, it is required additional work. Now, we're just coming off the legislative session. I think the last count was there were upwards of 100 meetings that were held between the committees. Every one of those meetings has to be posted and, the process. So certainly from the clerk's office and from administration, Winnette, between the two of them, yes, there's a burden there. It's not overly burdensome, but I think as we look into the future as to how to provide the committees with the staff support that they deserve in order to be effective, I think that's a conversation we do need to talk about this next budget cycle. I don't think it's going to be several people, but there is a staff impact. And so, yes, that is their comment. And so the other component, it was very hard, and I will provide some defense to the Local Affairs Committee. All those meetings were scheduled, all of them were posted, all of that process happened, but most of the time we didn't have a quorum, or the person who was invited to come didn't come. So there was a lot of work that happened there on the staff side that didn't have the result of moving us forward and being more effective as an organization.
So just to clarify, you're saying, yes, it was more burdensome on the staff than not? Yes or no?
Yes, there was additional work from it. I think, though, that work, if we're more effective in our community and at this table, then it's worth the investment that we're making in it.
Councilmember Boyette, you had something else, and somebody else had a.
So right now we have.
Councilmember Denise.
We have 4 committees. Would it behoove us to say that if we only had 3, the world would be happier?
Well, it certainly is less posting and less things if there's 3 versus 4. But I don't think that's the motive to consolidate it all. I don't think the motive is, that isn't why I would recommend you go from 4 to 3 or 2. It's, what do you think, how do we get to that point where the 2 committees that got a lot of work done, frankly, got a lot of work done in advancing the city in this area, whether it was budget and finance or the legislative committee, and expanding the quality of the relationships we had with legislators this session.
Councilmember Joy? And then, Council, we should put this sort of vote and move on to the next topic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yeah, I just wanted, I don't agree I don't disagree at all with the statements that are made about the importance of what the Local Affairs Committee is attempting. Our meetings were 1 hour long. To get 1 hour a meeting with a superintendent is not easy. To get a 1 hour meeting with other elected officials is not easy. They are not legislators who are kind of on and off the clock. They're on the clock. And so it's a little bit of a challenge, but the mission is really, really important. But through what I experienced is that what was actually kind of being built was more of a one-on-one relationship, which I'm not sure is all that effective for the whole entire council. Even though a member of a committee may have a good rapport with particular people and build that relationship, I'm not sure that's actually what we intended either. Because if we want to leverage what we're doing as council, that one person might be quite helpful, but I don't think it's actually what we expect. Thank you.
Okay, Council, I think staff would appreciate some sort of direction here, because this will need to come back to us in the form of a revised resolution. So we need to bring clarity there. Before I put it to vote, Councilmember Boyette, you wanted to comment?
I just think that moving the local affairs to the legislative committee makes sense. They're still talking to people.
Okay.
That's what they're doing.
So that's sort of the proposal, number one, number two, as a package. I think there's a majority, but I think let's make it formal if you're, or sort of formal. Because again, we're not deciding this, and keep an open mind. When it comes back, we can have further discussion. But is there a majority who want staff to include this change in whatever revised resolution might come back to us? If in favor of that, raise your hand. I'm seeing a majority. If opposed or hesitant or whatever, Councilmember Purington, Councilmember Rowan. But you've got a majority there on that item. We didn't give it a name, this legislative committee. That's not, wouldn't be accurate anymore. Intragovernmental, my concern about that, Councilmember Shaw, is the average person out there is not necessarily going to know what that means, and we're always going to see, was it inter or intra? What's the difference? Blah 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 blah. It's not very catchy. We need something sexy, something like is this okay? Yes. Yeah, that's sexy. Government Partners Committee.
The word that I've always used is relationships.
Relations with whom? We need a name, and then we don't have to decide on that. But
Relations.
Government and legislative committee, local affairs, just add the two together.
well, we could, but that's a lot. We need a couple of words, so we can come
State
back to that.
local?
Anyway, that's my
State local
proposal.
affairs?
Government Partners Committee,
Government partners.
or government stakeholder. I don't know, something. But think about it, a catchy, sexy name for that group. Maybe, or they could make that determination themselves too, I suppose. Okay, item number 3. This is the term. Right now, the resolution has a 2-year term limit, so that means everybody comes off at the same time, right? And a new crop goes on. And there's also a provision in there about the council members can't. Well, okay, so, and your proposal, Councilmember Shaw, is to remove that. You want to just remind us?
Yeah, I think we
Of
should.
that item.
I think we should remove that from the resolution because, at least from the work the legislative committee did, 5 brand-new people I don't think makes any sense. But I think having 2 or 3 that stay, that move, so that you've got people kind of swapping around somehow. So I don't know if we just remove that entirely from the resolution. I mean, honestly, I'd be fine with if it's not every single person that sits on a committee. Not everybody has enough time to do it. I get that. So maybe that also needs to be stripped out.
Okay, and technically, who sits on these is the appointment of the mayor. And yet, if every council member, or I'm sorry, every ward is represented, and we have 2 5-member committees, then
That's easy math, but I think if we decide we don't want everyone required to sit on a committee, I think we've got to strip that language that says you can't have 2 members from the same ward. Otherwise, we would never get to 5 for either of them. If 2 people decide, oh, I don't have time to do this, if that makes sense.
yeah, so,
I guess I would say sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
no.
Oh, okay, I guess I would say there's a couple of issues here. I think we need to decide, do we want everyone to be required to sit on a committee? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think it's easy. We do it by wards, right? 1 person from each ward sits on 1, and then we figure out some scenario to switch that up. You'd have to have people on the same ward agreeing to swap, if that makes sense. You'd have to have Ed and I saying, okay, we'll swap this year, you guys will swap this year, and then 2 years from now, these 2 will swap. So you'd have some kind of a system that worked like that. But if the answer is not everyone should sit on a committee, then I think we have to strip out the language that says you can't have 2 members from a ward sitting on a committee. Does that make sense?
Okay, so Councilor Tree, Councilor Boyette?
I think it's really, really important to recognize, I think that you're putting a bunch of different rules regulations really in here to try to structure it so that there is some sort of goals that are being achieved. I'm not exactly sure what those goals actually are. I'm not sure what we're trying to prevent from happening with them. My personal choice when building something like this is to leave it open, and then as we start to recognize that there might be problems and stuff like that, deal with them at that point, as opposed to trying to foresee what every possible problem could be and build a structure that ends up not being workable because it doesn't fit the dynamics of the group. And the dynamics of this group changes every 2 years. So who's on what committee and stuff like that becomes more important to some people than it would to others. So frankly, I would set the maximum number, a minimum number, and a maximum number that any one person can be on, and leave it at that.
Okay, the argument is to if I'm hearing you right, you'd get rid of the requirement that you have to serve on a committee.
You have to serve in a committee, you have to rotate, you have to.
You'd get rid of that.
Yeah.
Councilor Boyette, you had your hand up, I believe.
I could see this as a real problem if you're requiring everybody to do it, because there are some people who would volunteer for everything, and there's other people who say, I just can't do it, I'm busy, I can't come to a 9 o'clock meeting on a Tuesday. I mean, I kind of like the idea of the mayor, having minimum of 3, maximum of 5, and letting the mayor go around and say who's available, who wants to be on this committee, because I want people who are interested in local affairs or legislative, I've been really excited about the budget. I think that was a great idea. But I think other people have different ideas of what's important to them, and you get to choose and pick.
So just take volunteers, it's the usual way, raise your hand, sort of deal. Okay. Further discussion on this question of how these committees get staffed. Any sort of restriction, except for number, we talked about that.
But my only thought is you need at least 3, because there's invariably somebody sick, on vacation, or traveling. So you need, and then having 1 or 2 people there sometimes doesn't work. It just doesn't work, so.
You can't have 6.
And you can't have 6, but.
Yeah, and I would ask, if we do go down that path, we just do what we did when this was created, talk amongst yourself. And within your own ward, what do you want to do, what do you want to do, and give me the rubber stamp, which is just fine. Sometimes it's a real battle, because everybody wants to be on some item or some committee, but yeah, then I flip the coin. Okay, yeah, okay. Further discussion, though, on that. I don't know if we've resolved anything, but that's an interesting, it would require some editing. We haven't got into it that much detail. I think we'd probably leave Gina, right? We pump this to Gina? Right? Okay. Are there any limits?
I would say it just looks like striking basically A, B, C right there. Just council member terms on the committees are 2 years. That's it. And maybe there's some language in there about the mayor appoints people, but just taking out those requirements.
Okay,
And
so a 2-year term, but you'd get rid of the term limit. Anybody feel strongly about keeping the term limit? And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, and then also striking, no 2 council members from the same ward shall sit on a committee at the same time.
So that would go away. You could potentially have 2 from the same ward. Is that okay? Nobody is,
Maybe they only do the volunteers.
Well, yeah.
that might be.
Yeah.
That's okay. Member terms of the Council Operations Committee shall last, okay, well, that's a separate item. So, okay. So C actually might continue there, but A and B would go away. Is that consensus? Anybody want to have a vote? I'm not seeing anybody disagreeing or asking for a vote. So, okay. I guess that will be Gina's marching orders until told otherwise. That then, I guess, kind of takes care of 3, right? Board chair also, so Councilmember Shaw, back to you on item number 4. You were talking about a term limit on board chair positions.
Yeah, that is.
Which would be new, right?
Which would be new. That is one I would like to see, because I think if we're eliminating all the rest of these requirements that are having people move committees, you could potentially have someone that's a board chair for 8 years, which I don't think is going to be beneficial for council. So I would like to see those as 2-year terms, as just basically the only requirement now.
Okay, Councilor Boyette, what did you think about that? 2 thumbs up, okay. I see, okay. Anybody want to argue against that or for it? Councilmember Gill, Councilmember Purington?
I don't know that I'm going to argue against it. I think there's certainly some good reasons for having that. That being said, chairing the committee is extra work. And some people will bring a real energy and a lot of skills to that, and the whole committee benefits from that. And so I don't want to necessarily require someone to be a chair who doesn't really want to do it or is not going to put the energy into it, and the committee will suffer for that too. So, I can't say, I mean, in theory, I like the idea, but in practice, it may not get the desired result.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fact specific, isn't it, depending on what the circumstances are at any given time, I guess. Councilor Purington?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't even know, so to limit it for 2 years, okay, but you might switch after a year. I mean, I think Roy was kind of done after this year. And so to say, okay, you're going to do it for a second year. So to limit it for 2 years, I don't see anything wrong with that. But, I mean, I would say within the committee, if they want to change it every year, they could, more than welcome to do it.
Yeah, inside the committee.
So maybe, sorry, Mayor? A compromise might be, not compromise, but there's a election every year on the committee, so that, if someone if the majority of the committee feels like, all right, that person's had enough time there, that can change. I just don't want to have a forced rotation that requires someone to be a chair who doesn't really want to be.
Okay, so it could provide that there be an election each year, just so that that's clear. And not at the end of the term of 2 years, but every year? I guess that'd provide more opportunity for variety, whatever you want to call it. Is that a compromise or whatever, just to have election every year for the chair? Okay. Anybody want to argue? I'm seeing consensus in that direction. Okay. So no term limits per se, but require election for chair each year. And Gina, if you ever have any questions about what we're asking, please jump in at any point.
Did you say every 2 years or every year for an election? That's the part I didn't hear.
What I heard is every year.
Every year, okay.
Yeah, by the committee. And that then would resolve item 4, and then item number 5 is the Ops Committee. The scope of which, or the mission of which, has always been a little bit fuzzy, to put it gently. So I'm going to turn back to Councilmember Shaw again to frame the issues for issue number 5.
So I think you're exactly right. It ends up being kind of this dumping ground committee, like, let's just send stuff to these guys because it doesn't fit the scope of any of the other committees. So I think we just, as council, need to clearly define what it is we want that committee to do. Do we want it, if it's just an operations committee, it should be limited to meeting efficiency, council relationships, the operations of council. If we want it to be a policy committee, which is some of the work that's gotten thrown that way, I think it needs to be expanded and have 2 mayoral appointees, so it's a 5-person committee that's dealing with policy issues. So either way, but I would just like clarity.
Let me put a question back to you is, because I always interpret this to be the first, internal council operations. Isn't everything we do policy? I'm not quite sure where we would draw that line.
I guess I would say, for example, when we were talking about the proposed, RFP process, and we kind of got into the weeds a little bit in our council meeting, and we weren't really sure where would that go if we have council members that want to do a really deep dive into that. That would be an example of something of, okay, this is going to go to the policy committee to really sit down and hash it all out, not in our Monday night meeting, but in a group that can sit with Gina and have back and forth and ask questions. So that's my thought of that's what it would be, is serving that purpose.
Sort of a garbage can.
Well-
Yeah. But no, I understand that there's always a need for that, right? I'm thinking we could just create an ad hoc committee when that comes up.
That would be fine, and then I think we just need to be very clear that the operations committee the scope of it is our relationships, meeting efficiency, and then I think I'm fine with it being the mayor, deputy mayor pro tem.
Leave as is.
Leave as is, but we should put it into the resolution, that clarity of, this is what the scope of this committee is dealing with. We're not going to send your way a 9-page proposed resolution or ordinance to hash out, because that's not what you would do.
Okay, all right. Are people okay with that clarification, but leaving the ops as a group for internal operations? And if we have a special project, we create a special committee for the special project, probably. Okay. Yeah, for policy, whatever policy is, right? Again, I'm seeing nodding heads. Not a lot of disagreement on that. Okay. Councilor Pearson?
Just a quick question. So I'm trying to remember some of the things that were actually done in that committee. I mean, what came out of the
Sure.
committee?
So Councilmember Neese could chime in, Councilmember Boyette can chime in. Guns in our facilities, for example, and at meetings. Starting on a lot of the RFP for the sale of the building. Starting on our internal ordinance revisions for meetings, but we've always gotten sidetracked on other things. But that's the real core thing that group needs to be doing, as well as the charter approval. And so the resolution, which will be coming back to you on going to the voters for charter review or government review. Remember, we haven't made any decisions about this, come up with a dollar amount that goes on the ballot and that. Several other things, but I'm blanking. Councilmember Boyette, you remember other?
Well, we went over and looked at Park 1, the sale of property.
Yeah, that RFP.
The only thing is, I guess I'm going to regress a little bit. 3 people sometimes isn't enough because there's always somebody missing. So I wouldn't be opposed to having 3 or 4 or 5 people, just for the logistics of having enough people.
What about the same 3 to 5 range? But still the core of those 3 and 2 volunteers if they exist. That be okay? Any objections to that? Okay, Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Rupsis, did you ever have?
My biggest thing is no one ever shows up from the public on any of this stuff. I'm really concerned that we do all the minutes, we do all this preparation, we send all this notice out, and nobody shows up anyway. And all we're doing is talking between ourselves and then coming back here to the council. These groups don't make any decision. They just say, this is what we think, and we vote here. It just seems like a lot of expenditure for not benefit, because look at the public tonight.
If I could respond to that, Mayor, is that all right?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I don't necessarily think these committees are for the public benefit. They're open, we welcome the public to come, but in my opinion, the sweet spot of this is that when the legislative committee brings you a recommendation and says, we approve this unanimously, that's 5 members of council that's already on board with something. When the budget, that's why I want 2 more people on budget and finance. I want that committee to have more weight, so that when you come and say, look, we've sat and reviewed how to fund the city hall renovation. We spent hours doing this. I can just say like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, people that, you know, are across the spectrum, check. I don't have to spend a lot of time on it.
That wasn't my point, was we're recording all this, we're posting all this. It seems to me that seems like a waste of energy, where we still come up with the same result if we didn't have a tape recorder and announce it to the world, because nobody shows up anyway. But I agree, you want the wait, say, we spent 4 hours on this and beat it to death. We think this is a good idea, but I'm just saying, do we really need the formality of this, is what, to me, seems like a.
Gotcha, yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Tricky?
I think when you're wordsmithing something, you're not going to bring a very large audience in there. If you, on the other hand, are talking high-level policy and trying to figure out where to go with something, I think you would get a lot of community involvement in it if they know what's going on. Because honestly, that's the point in time when, when we're starting to throw ideas around, that who's in the room makes, the most difference.
And the committee should always feel free to invite the members of the community that might be interested. There may be some topics, of course, that have real stakeholders, and we shouldn't be shy to invite them. Something else, Councilor Tricky?
Does it really make sense to require the mayor, deputy mayor, and pro tem to be on this? Or should it just be?
Not necessarily. It's just they tend to be kind of anal people. And so there's some.
You're saying we elect anal people?
Just the way it's worked out, but in the future, not necessarily, so.
I mean, I do feel pretty strongly about that, only because I feel like otherwise, what are these, not the mayor's position, but what are these positions for, if not for doing some of this work? And so I feel like I would like that in the back of council's mind as we're thinking about who to elect to these positions soon, is that who do we want making these decisions, sitting on this committee? So anyway, I do feel strongly about that part, that it at least includes those 3.
Okay. Other comments? So back to item number 5, trying to figure out where we were at. What I was hearing is some consensus about keeping it focused on these internal operation issues, having ad hoc committees if needed, making the same membership numbers 3 to 5, but still keeping those core 3. Was there any other issue out there that we talked about but we didn't reach some resolution on? Okay, and Councilmember Boyette, we feel your pain on that, but I'm not hearing you're just expressing the challenge.
And what you're talking about, I mean, if it really is, internal operations, wordsmithing, stuff like that, maybe it should be ad hoc. Maybe not the committee itself, not having a committee to do those things, but every time something like that comes up, just have an ad hoc committee do it, and that takes care of.
It could. There is an advantage to having a committee where things probably go. And if it only comes up once every year or two, then you could do it ad hoc. But there really hasn't been a shortage of things to do, so I'd hate to have to go through the pain of identifying a new committee every time, too. That's not easy. So, or even if it's ad hoc, that's a challenge. Councilmember Gillick?
Yeah, that was going to be my point. It's just, it takes energy and time for us to put together an ad hoc committee. And it's a pretty minor matter, but still something that we shouldn't be dealing with here. Like, it just takes that much more effort to put that together. It's nice to be able to have a go-to.
Okay. Okay. I think we're kind of at the end of number 5, right? Okay. So Gina, ask questions later. I don't know there's any about the timing. This needs to be resolved before the end of the year, right? And it would be nice to get people's input on committees that they would like to be on before the end of the year, including any newly electeds. There's probably no reason we couldn't involve them in the discussion, right? But do we need to have this resolved immediately in the beginning of January, or we'll see. We'll play that one by ear a little bit. If there's no great rush, then it could be delayed at least a few weeks, but we'd want to get it done in January sometime, I would think, so. All right, then we'll call that a wrap. There's nobody here to make public comments on item number 2. Nobody is online, so that's the end of item number 2. Chris, item number 3, highlighting upcoming agenda items of council interest.
Mayor and Council, I'll admit I didn't pull it up while I'm doing it. I want to remind you of an important training on the 18th of this week. So remember the National Incident Management System training for elected officials is from 5:30 until, I believe it's 9 o'clock on this Wednesday. Actually, 5:30 to 9:30 is the time. I'm not certain it requires every minute of that, but that's the scheduled time, 5:30 to 9:30 this Wednesday. The BOCC boardroom, so Billings Operations Center? No.
County Commissioner's Office.
Okay, Commissioner's boardroom. So new City Hall.
Yeah, new City Hall.
The new City Hall, 3rd floor.
That will include dinner? Will it? Do we know? Could we get an email on that?
Yes,
if you
I
don't know?
think from 5:30 to 9:30, it's pretty hard to get something to eat between that. We'll make sure that there's some food.
Okay, great.
So the other piece is your agenda a week from tonight. That packet is out, though it will be amended. So tomorrow, we will amend the packet to include the resolution, the TBID MOU, and I will be better at using the term assessment. It is a self-imposed assessment by the TBID. Also, the other thing I'll amend is I will just clean up the memo so there's no confusion that I am not asking or suggesting what a pay adjustment should be. My intent of my memo on my compensation was to say the ball is in your court per tonight's evaluation. You determine the adjustment based on performance, period. That's what it meant to say. But after a little help here, I can see how it could be easily misinterpreted. So I will clean that up. I'm not aware of other, hot issues to flag for you this evening.
Be sure to vote.
Say that again.
Ballot should be coming out this week. Be
Yeah,
sure to
sorry, on that front, yes, ballots get mailed on Wednesday, which means they should be in mailboxes this Thursday for registered voters inside the city limits.
Okay, all right, thank you. Council discussion. Councilor Pearson.
Just a quick question, Chris, with the grant that we received for trees.
Yes.
Is there a plan in place yet? And when do you expect to get those dollars?
So the grant application was to produce a plan and plant trees. I mean, that's the gist of that. Are you asking if you'd like me to put it on a work session to give you guys an update? Or the plan, and we did get the grant, the grant.
So what are you going to do? What's the plan moving forward with the money?
So it is to create a forestry plan for the community, and it is to plant trees. We can bring to you, I can have the staff that created that application give us a summary of what was included in the grant.
And I would say along with that, their plan moving forward with that. I mean, that's quite a bit of money that I think, I don't know where those dollars actually came from, if they're federal tax dollars or if they're.
Yeah. Yes, those are federal, that is a federal grant that the city received notice of. I mean, there will be a grant agreement, and that agreement will need to come before this body ultimately for approval too. Typically, that process, what we were notified of is the award. but those awards come with ultimately an agreement, and that agreement ends up on an agenda for approval.
I think your suggestion is a good one, Chris, that there be some sort of presentation by our city forester, Steve Connell. We don't go down this path every day. It would be interesting, and I think fun for us and for the community to know more about this. He doesn't have to have everything pinned down, but give us some idea of what this process might look like. Any other public council discussion? Councilmember Owen?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, like you've said a number of times, I remain a little perplexed by the initiative process. So I talked about an initiative that's really important to me at one of our last council meetings. I think there's some work underway on it. So I'm unclear if we need to vote or if that's just simply been agreed to, or I don't want to lose sight of this. So I'm puzzled.
On your last initiative?
Yes, Mayor.
Remind us the topic again.
Domestic dedicated family violence unit at BPD.
Okay, so yeah, you gave us the alert.
Correct, and I sent it to everybody, but then it's my understanding that there's already been some work done, which is wonderful, and I'm thrilled. So I'm just not sure where to go, because I didn't see it on the agenda for next week for a vote. So that's, I think, where I was.
Okay, so my understanding, council, is this initiative process, and it's not based on any research, is when we want to make sure something's on an agenda, the keeper of the agenda is the city administrator. So what I've always said is there's really no need to have an initiative if it's already going to be on an agenda. But that kind of goes back to the city administrator. So if the city administrator opposes putting something on an agenda, that would be a perfect situation for an initiative. Or if the city administrator just wants some clarification, doesn't have to be in opposition to it, but before going down a path that might take a lot of staff, that might be unclear about, you want to go this direction or that direction, that would be another good opportunity for initiative. But it kind of comes back to, I guess, you, Chris, to help us know whether an initiative is needed, and whether you want to vote, and specifically on this issue of the dedicated domestic violence unit element in the BBT.
To be clear, my initiative was just simply to research it, not to establish it. And so I do think that there would have to be a future work session where we would debate, discuss that. But this was only to sort of start the work in the research. So I just don't want to get cart ahead of the horse.
Correct. So Mayor and Council, I think the cleanest and most direct thing to do is for me to put it on the agenda next week. We're not waiting for that to happen. I fully anticipate. We've strongly been supporting this direction. So I will add it to the agenda while we're making these changes. That way there'll be clarity that there's 11-0 or whatever there is to move this way. As was stated, it's not to create it, it's to do the work. And we've already started that. But I think at the foundation of the initiative process, and I guess there's a judgment call as to how critical the topic is. Some are very easy for me to just add on an agenda. Other ones that I think are resource heavy, it is really beneficial to know that we've got clarity from the elected body that you want us to move in that direction. So I will add it, so it'll be there to be voted on next week. As well, you've got 2 zone changes are your other 2 items for a week from today, and my pay adjustment.
Okay, that's good. And on that issue, will there be some indication of cost? I mean, the study process usually is not a big, heavy lift financially, but will that mean something in our existing budget?
I think the way that I recall the initiative being drawn up, it really is to do some homework and come back to you at a work session. That would include.
Next step, right. So
I think it would be
minimal,
premature to
nothing.
overly speculate on costs at this point.
I would certainly hope to not trigger a cost just to figure out what it might look like.
Correct.
Right? Yeah, so I would hope that.
A road map.
I would hope.
Build a roadmap, okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, anything else on council discussion? Don't see any, so we're adjourned. Thank you. Oh, is there any public comment? Got anything, Sergeant? Okay, we're good. We're adjourned.